People who grew up with strict parents. What was the most unreasonable rule? My now wife's parents wanted an itinerary of where we would be on every date. She was 19 at the time but still living at home. I thought they were asking in a more general way, so I answered, well, we're headed to a show. Then probably dinner. Maybe a coffee after. Unacceptable. Which show? What time would we be physically inside the venue? When did the show end? Which restaurant? What time will you be eating? Which coffee shop? I was just like, haven't really thought that far ahead. We'll let you know. She can't leave till we know. I just made some shit up. Seemed to placate them. From that point on I would just rattle off some bullshit and do whatever we wanted. Very weird people. My grandma had a no leaving the table until you eat your food rule. Pretty reasonable. Except she would prepare your plate, often with more food than you wanted. One time she made me a chicken salad sandwich, but the chicken salad had turned. She wouldn't let me leave. She just sat across from me to make sure I didn't get up until I ate it. This went on for hours. Until my mom got off work and picked me up. It wasn't even that strict a household. I think she liked control, and this was one of the few arenas where she could exercise it. Listening to non-Christian music was punishable by being grounded for weeks. No music allowed when cleaning the house, because it would distract us. Also, not allowed to do anything with friends on a Sunday because it was family day, even though we never did anything as a family and just stayed shut in our rooms. Same here with that second thing. I've moved out for college but get told literally every time I visit that I'm never here. I'm there almost every 2 weeks because I have some friends there, and also like my grandparents. Whenever I am over, everyone sits in front of a TV in their room or sometimes the living room. But then you need to get out because you could be causing noise or disturbing otherwise. Among other stupid, nonsensical rules. Until I moved out at 17, I wasn't allowed to say fart because it's a swear word. If I needed to talk about farts, I had to call them fluffs. My best friend and I would kill ourselves over how silly this was. I'm 26 now, and as much as my parents are proud of me for my life accomplishments so far, I know they're not proud of me for having a very extensive, dirty vocabulary. Feels good to prove to them I can talk like a degenerate and be successful. We had to wear a jacket if the weather was under a certain temperature. Even a single degree wouldn't sway my dad. He kept a thermometer outside so he could check every morning. On the other hand, our health insurance sucked. So there's that. Once I grabbed a jacket out of the hall closet, sending everything else flying off the hangers and into a pile on the floor. I was halfway through my mile-long walk to school when he pulled up in his car, his face red, refusing to talk to me. I thought something terrible had happened to my brother. When we got back to the apartment, he pointed at the hall closet. After I cleaned up, he refused to give me a late note. School had already started, or a ride. Once I saw him on campus at my high school, looking for me over the tops of kids' heads. I turned around and made a beeline for the bathroom. I have no idea what terrible transgression I committed that day. Left a jar of jelly open, perhaps. I wasn't allowed to wear the color red because Nan said it was, and I quote, a color for whores. No red clothes, red nail polish, red lipstick, jewelry. Soon as I finished high school I dyed my hair fire truck red. Kept it for nearly 10 years. As a fuck you to my Nan. It actually grew on her and she got really upset when I changed it. Locks on the fridge and pantry. Bars on the windows. Wasn't allowed to have the computer password. Not so much rules as paralyzing amounts of control. Did you also live in a cupboard under the stairs? I was never allowed out with my friends. After school, the weekends, the holidays etc. I stopped being invited out after a while and internet became my friend. Might explain why I prefer online company. And now they're pissed that you won't go out as much, right? No deodorant. It was considered a perfume. And using perfumes was considered vain. There were a whole bunch of other ridiculous rules. But that was probably the most unusual. Couldn't go to prom because dancing was the devil's activity. Same. I worked that night at the grocery store. Sold corsages to all the prom kids. Still kind of pissed about it. Having to ask permission for everything. From having a snack to a glass of water to see something on TV. Sure, some of it might be reasonable. But because it applied to every single thing combined with very degrading comments. Now as an adult, I struggle with figuring out what is normal when it comes to wanting things. I don't know what's allowed and what's not without asking. But asking a lot is awkward since other people just assume. This combined with a fear of failure and rejection tends to make Unfamiliar. Social situations awkward. Unreasonable stepdad. All number 2 visits to the porcelain throne must be complete before 6 p.m. Or you wait till the next morning. That's not unreasonable. That's abuse. One of my high school friends wasn't allowed out in the evenings. We were 16. So every Friday night he would go to bed early, and then climb out of his bedroom window, along a tiny ledge around the outside of the building, and back through the window of the elevator lobby. He lived on the 18th floor, and did this for like a year until his parents found out. Jesus, that sounds dangerous as fuck. It doesn't sound like much, but being punished for every mistake. Want to know what doing that gets you? It gets you a kid who is a very good liar. A kid that is so afraid to try anything new he stays in his comfort zone since failure is punished instead of learned from. And it gets you a kid who takes years to overcome the mental stigma of failure after they are out from under your household. So true. I'm an amazing liar. Thanks to my parents. It's honestly a little disturbing. I wasn't allowed to have a doorknob on my bedroom door. I wasn't allowed to speak to my stepdad, ever, for any reason. And of course the infamous, because I said so. WTF. Be home before sunset. The sun sets really early in my country, and if it was an overcast day I could not tell. Every minute I was late was a day I was grounded. I mentioned this in another post some time ago, but I wasn't allowed to have guys call for me or come to the house. Ever. Even when I was a child and dating or sex was the furthest thing from anyone's minds. She thought it would make me turn out to be some little slut. Unfortunately for her, shielding me from all those boys just made me slutty later on. Sounds like my mom. She developed a really intense fear that, if I learned anything about sex, I would start having it and become pregnant. I remember one time, I just offhandedly said I wanted something for dinner because I had a craving for it. She looked right at me and said, "Are you pregnant?" I laughed at first because I honestly thought she was joking, but quickly realized she wasn't and said, "No. What makes you think that it's usually pregnant women who have cravings and you've never said you've craved anything before in your life?" I was 10. Tons of them. But the worst was about a year period when we had to address our parents as mother dear and father dear and our siblings as brother dear and sister dear. My father was a sick asshole who just came up with that one day and strictly enforced it until he went on his next deployment. Luckily he forgot about it by the next time we saw him. Sad thing is, I was friends with a girl for a while whose dad was fairly high up in the military. She was kinder. Yeah. Her dad was always deployed and her mom was hyper strict and controlling. She wasn't allowed to wear swimsuits unless they had long sleeves legs. A one-piece was considered monstrous. And a two-piece meant you were a whore. She couldn't wear shorts either for similar reasons. Even in 110-degree weather, her brother wasn't allowed to wear anything less nice than a polo shirt and jeans. And they both did farm work all the time. His non-working clothes were what most people would wear to church on Easter Sunday. They had curfews of 4:30 p.m. They were allowed to only go see friends one Saturday each month. Otherwise they were only going to see people at classes. Oddly, their parents were very anti-religious. They were just super controlling. Eventually they both had a total falling out with their parents, apparently when both their parents demanded to know why their work clothes were so dirty after working in the barn. Mushroom cloud could be seen from space. She was a legitimately nice girl and I hope she's well. After that fight, she left and she was way gone. There were a lot of TV shows I wasn't allowed to watch. Mainly things like Pokemon because it obviously promotes evolution. The big one though is I wasn't allowed to get my driver's license. I had to learn how to operate a car and drive in case of emergencies but was not allowed to get my license. There were extreme amounts of bitching and whining when I needed to be picked up late due to my after-school activities or be dropped off at a Saturday competition. Then I was the ungrateful one if I complained about them yelling at me for having to go to an event. For a school activity they signed me up for, that I didn't want to do in the first place. Funny thing is that Pokemon doesn't even get evolution right. Pokemon evolution is really metamorphosis or simply aging. 16-year-old me. Can I go to the coffee shop with some friends? I'm done with all homework and I promise to be back by bedtime. Dad, number. You already went out once this week. That was actually the last straw. Because he made that rule up on the spot and doubtlessly had every intention of enforcing it. I snuck out my window and left home. He found me a couple days later and it turned out, after talking to his cop buddies, that he couldn't have them arrest me unless I was found breaking laws. I agreed to talk to him and my stepmother, whereupon they told me I could either live by their rules or not live there again. No brainer for me. packed a couple bags of favorite clothes and got the F out. Not allowed to close the door of my room from my 15 to my 18. I remember when I was a teenager, I went to a friend's house once to play some video games and felt strange the whole time but couldn't put my finger on why. Only when I was about to leave did I realize. His bedroom had no door. It had been taken completely off the hinges. I knew his parents were hyper-religious but that was nuts to me. Super safe, great neighborhood. I was a goody two-shoes rule follower. I wasn't allowed to get dropped off at the mall with my friends without an adult when I was 13. Among other things. Eventually the other girls stopped calling and inviting me places. Then my mom thought there was something wrong with me because I didn't have any friends. She'd get really mad at me and try to force me to invite kids over to our house to do dumb shit like play dolls. No thanks. When I was 22 I finally made a friend and was going to crash at her house in the city after seeing a late play. She made my friend come in and meet her and asked her questions about where we were going and who would be there. Who was driving. What their driving record was like. Humiliating. I moved out 2 months later without telling anyone. To a ghetto apartment that I couldn't afford on my PT retail paycheck. Went to metal bars every night until 2 a.m. and kept unsavory male company at my place. Mom's parenting backfired a little bit. No doors. Not even for the bathroom. When I went to a friend's house for the first time I never got invited over again since I shit with the door open. No friends allowed at the house. No sitting in the living room. So this was something I only really came to understand after I'd left home and gotten some perspective on my childhood. But basically, my sister and I were not permitted to ever be angry. It wasn't that we weren't allowed to shout or raise our voices. That was a given. It wasn't that we weren't allowed to talk back or argue. That was also a given. It wasn't even about not getting violent or something. There was no question of that. It was that we were never supposed to display any signs of being angry. Being angry isn't nice and we were supposed to be nice little girls who only said, did, and thought nice things. So it didn't matter how horribly I was being bullied or how staggeringly unfair something was or how cheated I felt about another unreasonable change of mind on my parents' part. I was never allowed to get angry. And if I was angry I was not allowed to let that show in any way. My parents are literally this. They bitch and complain. Yet I'm not allowed to when I'm near them. Even when it's not directed at them. Because me being angry means I'm acting stupid. I had 2 really good friends I wanted to hang out with. T was a good solid guy and never really got into trouble. J sold pot and got into general teenage troubles. My mom told me I had to stop hanging out with T and spend more time with J because T was a bad influence. My mom's ex-boyfriend lived with us for a while. Worst person I've ever met. He made a rule that specifically I wasn't allowed to talk on the phone in the house. I didn't even call people often. One night a friend called me after they've gone up to bed so I went outside into the street to speak to them. Next thing I know I'm being screamed at out the window for being on the phone in the street. I wasn't allowed to do anything to my hair. My mother saw it as an extension of her hair. School time. No staying up late or movies on TV or going out. Undergrad. No male friends or calls messages when at home. Had my phone taken for surprise surveillance. Or going on trips or staying out after 5 p.m. Sunsets here at 7 p.m. Post-grad. No male friends, no friends allowed at home, no outings, no trips. I live in a society where arranged marriage is a norm, so now that I am of the age, they ask me if I have a special someone. Are you kidding me? Plot twist. This is a heterosexual male. I mean, I guess it wasn't too bad, but not being able to leave the table until I finished my plate. The problem was that I didn't get to decide how much food was on my plate and I would often stay seated alone for hours. And being punished for throwing up after finally stuffing everything down. Born in 1960. Was required to have an above-the-ear haircut through high school. This was the hippie era. Lots of picking on. Was told to ignore it. Thanks for the memories, Dad. Grew up in a Chinese family, so I can't have non-Chinese friends. We were not allowed to shower, bathe, wash with warm water more than twice a week because it was an unnecessary waste. My parents wouldn't allow my brother and I to say but, or anything worse than that. The only thing it did was make us both very creative with language. I never censored my own children, besides telling them things like, okay, we're going to your grandparents' house. Keep the F-bombs to a minimum. Couldn't say but, had to say bottom instead. Not P, but tinkle, and many others. I didn't like it, but it wasn't the worst thing. And my sister and I were creative. As you said, my parents were old. That pretty much covers it. Gaming is bad for you. You shouldn't game. Maybe go play outside with friends. Me. Mom. Those friends are indoor gaming. Mom. Go make new friends. If I listened to her I would now be a loner with no friends.